Good evening all, and welcome back to Paranoia Files. Tonight I return with 8 of the most disturbing crime stories ever to emerge from the state of Indiana, a collection of cases that have haunted investigators and families for years. In this episode, we will journey through the darkest corners of the Hoosier State, from unexplained vanishings that defy logic to crimes so twisted they challenge our understanding of human nature. These are not works of fiction. These are real events, real people, and real horrors that unfolded in small towns and cities across Indiana. Each account has been meticulously researched and reconstructed from police reports, court documents, and first-hand testimonies of those who lived through these nightmares. To respect the privacy and dignity of victims and their families, certain names and identifying details have been changed. But the essence of each story remains untouched and true to what actually occurred. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Paranoia Files for daily true crime content that exposes the darkness lurking in America's heartland. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover the next chilling case that the world tried to forget. I have carried this weight for 17 years and I cannot stay silent any longer. What happened to George on that September night in 2008 was not some random disappearance like the police claimed. I was there. I saw everything, and I did nothing to stop it. My name does not matter. What matters is that I was George's co-worker at Precision Manufacturing on the north side of Indianapolis. We both worked the night shift, him in quality control and me in inventory management. The plant ran 24 hours, churning out automotive parts for assembly lines across the Midwest. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept us both fed. George was the kind of guy you could set your watch by. 42 years old, never married, lived alone in a small efficiency apartment about 1.5 miles from the plant. He was quiet, methodical. The type who kept to himself but would help you if you asked. He wore the same rotation of flannel shirts, brought the same turkey sandwich for lunch every night, and left work at exactly 11:47 post-meridium every single shift. Not 11:45, not 11:50, 11:47. The route George walked home never varied. I know this because I watched him leave from the break room window more times than I can count. He would exit through the east gate, turn left onto Meridian Road, walk past the old abandoned grain mill that had been shut down since the 90s, cut through the St. Andrew's Church parking lot, and then disappear down Elm Street toward his apartment building. The whole walk took him about 23 minutes. I timed it once out of sheer boredom during a particularly slow inventory night. George always had his earbuds in, always kept his head down, always walked at the same steady pace. He existed in his own little world, and that world followed an unbreakable routine. I worked the opposite shift from George most of the time. I came in at 6 in the evening and he usually clocked out just before midnight. But on September 14th, 2008, I had stayed late finishing a massive inventory count that had taken all night. My supervisor told me I could leave around 11:30. I was exhausted, ready to get home, but when I walked out to the parking lot, my car would not start. The battery was dead. I tried jumping it with cables I kept in the trunk, but the engine would not turn over. It was a Sunday night, almost midnight, and I did not have anyone to call who would be awake. The closest bus stop was 2 miles away, and the buses had stopped running an hour ago. I looked at my phone and then looked at the road ahead. My apartment was about 2 miles west, which meant I would be walking the same general direction George always walked. I figured I could handle a 2-mile walk. I was tired but not desperate enough to pay for a cab that would cost me half a shift's wages. I locked my car and started walking down Meridian Road around 11:45. The street was mostly industrial in that area. Warehouses, storage facilities, the occasional small business with bars on the windows. Streetlights were spaced far apart, creating pools of sickly orange light with long stretches of darkness in between. It was September, so the air still held some summer warmth, but there was a coolness creeping in that made me wish I had brought a jacket. I had my phone out, using the flashlight feature to watch my footing on the cracked sidewalk. About half a block ahead of me, I saw George. He was right on schedule. I could see his distinctive green backpack and the way he walked with his shoulders slightly hunched. His white earbuds caught the light from the street lamps. I thought about calling out to him, maybe walking together since we were headed the same way, but something stopped me. George liked his solitude. He had made that clear in the 2 years we had worked together. He would nod politely if you spoke to him, but he never initiated conversation. He ate lunch alone, took his breaks alone, and seemed most comfortable when people left him to his routines. So I kept my distance, hanging back about half a block, just walking my own path home. That was when I noticed the van. It was parked on the side of the road just past the old grain mill, a dark-colored vehicle with no headlights on. At first I thought maybe it was abandoned or broken down. People sometimes left dead vehicles on this stretch of road because it was so isolated and nobody really patrolled it. But as I got closer, I realized the van was idling. I could see the faint shimmer of exhaust in the cool air and hear the low rumble of the engine. The van was positioned in one of the dark stretches between streetlights, making it almost invisible unless you were really looking. No headlights, no interior lights. Just sitting there, engine running, waiting. Something about it felt wrong. I cannot explain how I knew, but every instinct in my body started screaming that this was not right. I slowed my pace, suddenly hyper-aware of how empty and isolated this street was. There were no houses around here, no open businesses, nobody walking dogs or sitting on porches, just industrial buildings with locked gates and empty parking lots. George was about 100 feet ahead of me now, still walking at his steady pace, completely oblivious to the van. His head was down, his earbuds in, his world reduced to whatever music or podcast he was listening to. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The van started rolling forward slowly, staying in the dark space between streetlights. It moved at walking speed, keeping pace with George but staying about 30 feet behind him. The headlights remained off. Whoever was driving knew exactly what they were doing. They were hunting. I stopped walking completely and pressed myself against the chain-link fence of a storage facility, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream at George to run, but fear paralyzed me. My throat closed up and my legs felt like they had been filled with concrete. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was someone who knew George. Maybe they were just going to offer him a ride. Maybe I was being paranoid. George reached the grain mill, passing the crumbling brick structure with its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. The van accelerated slightly, closing the distance. I watched as the side door of the van slid open silently. It happened so fast. George walked past the open door and multiple hands reached out from inside. 3, maybe 4 sets of arms grabbed him simultaneously. One hand clamped over his mouth. The others grabbed his arms, his backpack, his body. George's legs kicked out as they yanked him sideways into the van. His phone and earbuds tore free and skittered across the pavement. His backpack fell to the ground. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds. One moment George was walking down the sidewalk and the next moment he was gone. The van door slid shut. The van continued rolling forward at the same steady pace, still no headlights, and turned left at the next corner. Then it was gone. I stood there frozen against that fence for several minutes, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. I do not know. Time stopped making sense. My brain kept trying to process what I had just witnessed. Did that really happen? Did I really just see someone get pulled into a van? This was Indianapolis in 2008, not some crime drama on television. Things like this did not happen in real life, except they do. And they just did. And I had watched it happen without doing a single thing to stop it. Eventually, my legs started working again. I walked toward the spot where it happened, each step feeling like I was moving through thick water. George's phone was lying face down on the sidewalk, the screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern. His earbuds were still connected, and I could hear music playing faintly from the tiny speakers. Some classic rock song I did not recognize. His green backpack was lying on its side near the curb, the zipper partially open. I could see his lunch container inside, the one he brought every night with his turkey sandwich. I reached down to pick up the phone and then jerked my hand back like it had burned me. If I touched anything, I would be part of this. If I picked up his belongings, there would be questions. The police would want to know why I was here, what I saw, what I did. The weight of what I should do versus what my fear was telling me not to do pressed down on me like a physical force. I should call 911 right now. I should report what I saw. But what exactly did I see? It was dark. I was half a block away. I could not describe the people in the van. I could not even tell you what color the van was for certain. Dark blue, maybe? Black? Gray? I did not get a license plate. I did not see faces. All I could tell the police was that I saw someone who might have been my co-worker George get pulled into a van by multiple people wearing what might have been dark clothing. How credible would that sound? And then the more selfish thoughts started creeping in. If I reported this, I would be a witness. What if whoever took George came after witnesses? What if there were more people involved, people watching to see if anyone saw anything? What if by speaking up I became the next target? I looked around at the empty street, the dark buildings, the long shadows. I was completely alone. No cars had passed. No one else had seen what happened. If I walked away right now, no one would ever know I was here. George and I worked different shifts. Nobody would connect us. I could just go home, go to sleep, and pretend I had never seen anything. I could tell myself I was not really sure what I saw. The human mind is incredible at rationalization when survival instincts kick in. And that is exactly what I did. I turned around and walked away. I left George's phone on the ground. I left his backpack on the sidewalk. And I went home. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying those 4 seconds over and over again. The hands reaching out, George's legs kicking, the van door sliding shut. I kept telling myself I was too far away to help. If I had run toward them, they would have taken me too. Shouting would not have made a difference. George already had earbuds in. He would not have heard me. And by the time I could have called 911, the van was already gone. I told myself these things until the sun came up, and then I got ready for my next shift like nothing had happened. George did not show up for work on Monday night. By Tuesday, his landlord filed a missing person report because George's rent check had not been delivered and he had not responded to calls. The police found his belongings scattered near the grain mill on Meridian Road. They questioned all of us at Precision Manufacturing. When the detective sat across from me in the break room and asked if I knew anything about George's disappearance, if I had seen anything unusual, if George had enemies or problems, I looked him in the eye and said no. I said George kept to himself. I said we were not close. I said I had no idea what could have happened to him. I did not mention that I stayed late that night. I did not mention that my car would not start. I did not mention that I walked down Meridian Road. And I certainly did not mention the van. The police organized search parties. Volunteers combed the areas around the grain mill for weeks. They dredged a nearby retention pond. They brought in cadaver dogs that sniffed every inch of the mill property. Local news stations ran George's photo on the evening news. His mother, a woman in her 70s who lived in Carmel, made tearful pleas for information. Missing person posters went up all over the north side of Indianapolis. George's face stared at me from telephone poles, convenience store windows, and community bulletin boards. Those posters multiplied like a plague, and I could not escape them. Every time I went to the grocery store or the gas station, George's eyes followed me. The posters asked, "Have you seen this man?" And I wanted to scream, yes, I saw him being dragged into a van and I did nothing. The case went cold after about 6 months. The police had no leads, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play beyond the abandoned belongings. The official theory was that George had been the victim of a random abduction, possibly for robbery or human trafficking. But without a body, without witnesses, without any kind of trail to follow, there was nothing they could do. The investigation stayed open but inactive. George's mother continued to post updates on social media every year on September 14th, the anniversary of his disappearance. She never stopped looking for answers. She never stopped hoping he would come home. I quit precision manufacturing 3 months after George vanished. I told myself it was for a better opportunity, a day shift position at a different company. But the real reason was that I could not walk past that break room window anymore. I could not look out at the east gate and watch other night shift workers leaving at 11:47. I could not drive past the grain mill without my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Every time I tried, I would see those hands reaching out, hear the van door sliding shut, and feel the weight of my cowardice crushing my chest. So I ran. I moved to Fort Wayne 2 years later, putting 120 miles between myself and Meridian Road. But distance does not erase guilt. It does not matter where I live or how many years pass. George is still missing. His mother is still searching. And I am still the coward who watched him disappear. I tell myself I was too far away to help. I tell myself that if I had intervened, I would be dead or missing too. I tell myself that shouting would have accomplished nothing except alerting the kidnappers that there was a witness. I tell myself that I did not get enough details to be useful to the police anyway. These rationalizations used to help me sleep at night. They do not anymore. The truth has become too heavy to carry alone. The truth is that George needed someone that night. He needed someone to act, to fight, to care more about his life than their own fear. And I failed him. I chose my safety over his survival. I chose silence over justice. I watched a man be taken and then I walked away like it never happened. If you are reading this, if you know anything about a dark-colored van near the old grain mill on Meridian Road in Indianapolis on September 14th, 2008, please come forward. Please do what I could not do 17 years ago. George's mother deserves to know what happened to her son. George deserves to be found, and maybe if someone else has the courage I lacked, some of this crushing guilt will finally ease. I have lived with this secret for 17 years. Every September 14th, I think about making an anonymous call to the police. Every year I pick up the phone and then put it back down, still too afraid of the questions, still too ashamed to admit what I saw. But I cannot stay silent forever. George is out there somewhere, or what remains of him is. Someone knows what happened. Someone drove that van, someone grabbed him and took him away. And someone somewhere has the answers that George's mother has been desperately seeking for nearly 2 decades. If that person is you, if you have any conscience at all, please come forward. Please give George's family the closure I stole from them with my silence. When we bought the foreclosed house on Sycamore Lane in Terre Haute, the realtor mentioned nothing about Isabella. It was not until we started renovations that we understood why no one had lived there for 9 years. My wife and I had been searching for a fixer-upper for almost 8 months when the property appeared at auction in late March of 2024. The listing described it as a 1920s farmhouse on 2 acres located on the eastern edge of Terre Haute, where the city gradually dissolves into farmland. The photos showed peeling paint, overgrown landscaping, and boarded-up windows, but the bones of the house looked solid. The price was absurdly low, even for a foreclosure. $63,000 for a 3-bedroom house with original hardwood floors and a wraparound porch. We put in a bid expecting competition. There was none. We won the auction and signed the papers within 2 weeks. The first time we pulled into the driveway with the keys in hand, the isolation of the property struck me immediately. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the road, an old farmhouse with a sagging roof and chickens wandering the yard. Beyond our property line, thick woods stretched for miles, a tangle of oak and sycamore trees that blocked out the sky. The house itself sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by waist-high weeds and volunteer trees that had grown unchecked for years. It looked abandoned, which technically it was. The bank had repossessed it in 2015 and it had sat empty ever since. 9 years of vacancy had taken their toll. The porch steps were rotted through. The gutters hung at odd angles. Every window was covered with plywood sheets spray-painted with no trespassing warnings. We started meeting the neighbors that first week, introducing ourselves and asking about the property history. The responses were strange. The elderly couple at the farmhouse down the road, the Hendersons, were polite but distant. When I mentioned we had bought the house on Sycamore Lane, Mrs. Henderson's smile disappeared. She made an excuse about needing to check on something in her kitchen and went inside, leaving her husband standing awkwardly on the porch. He mumbled something about the house being troubled and wished us luck before retreating into his own house. A similar encounter happened with the man who lived on the other side of us, a Vietnam veteran named Carl who spent most of his time working on old motorcycles in his garage. When I walked over to introduce myself, Carl was friendly until I told him where we were living. His expression changed. He looked past me at our house, visible through the trees, and shook his head slowly. "You might want to reconsider that investment," he said. When I pressed him for details, he just repeated that we should reconsider and went back to his motorcycle. The strangest reaction came from a woman I encountered while walking into town one afternoon. She was probably in her 60s, wearing a sun hat and gardening gloves, working in a small flower bed in front of a brick ranch house. I waved hello and she waved back. I mentioned we had just moved into the area, bought the old place on Sycamore Lane. The woman dropped her trowel. She stood up, brushed the dirt off her gloves, and looked at me with something close to pity. "That house should have been burned down years ago," she said flatly. Then she picked up her gardening supplies and went inside without another word. I stood there on the sidewalk, completely confused. What had happened in that house that made people react this way? Renovations began in early April. We started with the kitchen, ripping out cabinets that dated back to the 70s and pulling up linoleum that had probably been installed during the Eisenhower administration. The plan was to expose the original hardwood underneath and restore as much of the 1920s character as possible. My wife handled most of the design decisions while I did the demolition work. On the third day of tearing out the kitchen, I took a sledgehammer to what I thought was the exterior wall. The first swing punched a hole through the drywall. The second swing revealed something unexpected. Instead of hitting studs and insulation, the sledgehammer broke through into empty space. I pulled away more drywall and discovered a hidden compartment between the kitchen wall and what must have been an original exterior wall from when the house was first built. Someone had built an addition onto the kitchen at some point, creating a narrow space about 8 inches wide that ran the entire length of the wall. Inside that space, I found a cardboard box. It was wrapped in plastic garbage bags, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed with age. I pulled it out carefully, my heart already starting to race with the strange thrill of discovering something hidden. My wife came in from the other room asking what I had found. We carried the box to the living room and cut through the tape. Inside were journals, photographs, and a small metal lockbox secured with a combination lock. The journals were spiral-bound notebooks, the kind you buy at any drugstore, filled with handwriting in blue ink. The name on the inside cover of the first journal read Isabella Scott, January 2013. Over the next several hours, we read through Isabella's journals. The early entries were mundane. She had moved into the house in January of 2013 after a difficult divorce. She was 28 years old, working as a dental hygienist in Terre Haute, trying to rebuild her life in a place where she could afford to live alone. She wrote about painting the rooms, planting a garden, adopting a cat named Mochi. The tone was hopeful, even optimistic. She loved the isolation of the property. She loved the old house and its history. But somewhere around March of 2013, the entries started to change. Isabella began documenting strange occurrences. At first, small things. She would leave a coffee cup on the kitchen counter and find it moved to the dining room table. She would close a door and hear it open a few minutes later. She attributed it to the house settling, to old hinges and uneven floors. Then the incidents escalated. She wrote about hearing footsteps in the upstairs hallway when she was downstairs. She described finding her cat staring at empty corners of rooms, back-arched, hissing at nothing. Objects began moving more frequently. A book she had been reading would disappear from her nightstand and reappear on a shelf in another room. Lights would turn on in parts of the house she knew she had left dark. By summer of 2013, Isabella's writing became increasingly distressed. She described waking up in the middle of the night with the overwhelming sensation of being watched. She would lie in bed paralyzed with fear, sensing something standing in her doorway. She started sleeping with the lights on. The presence, as she called it, became more aggressive. She wrote about finding strange symbols drawn in the condensation on her bathroom mirror. She photographed them, crude geometric shapes that looked vaguely ritualistic. She documented shadows that moved independently of any light source, dark shapes that would drift across walls and floors when she entered a room. The most disturbing entry described the presence standing at the foot of her bed, a figure so dark it seemed to absorb light, watching her for hours while she pretended to sleep. Isabella called the police multiple times. They found no evidence of break-ins, no signs of intruders. They suggested she install security cameras and change her locks. She did both. The cameras captured more strange phenomena, orbs of light moving through rooms, furniture shifting position between frames, and in one particularly chilling piece of footage, the shadow figure she had described, standing in her bedroom doorway for 3 hours without moving. She took the footage to the police. They suggested she see a psychiatrist. Isabella saw 3 different mental health professionals between July and October of 2013. All of them prescribed medication for anxiety and possible schizophrenia. She took the medication. The incidents continued. The journals from late 2014 and early 2015 revealed Isabella's descent into something close to madness. The presence had begun communicating with her, or so she believed. She wrote about hearing whispers in the walls, voices speaking in a language she could not understand. She described the walls themselves changing, wood grain forming patterns that looked like faces, bleeding dark liquid when the presence was hungry. That word appeared repeatedly in her final entries. Hungry. The presence was always hungry. It wanted something from her. It demanded something. And Isabella, isolated and terrified and convinced that no one would believe her, started trying to give it what it wanted. The last entries were nearly illegible, written in a frantic scrawl that slanted across the pages. Isabella wrote about feeding the presents. She killed small animals, mice and birds she caught on the property, and left them in the basement where the presence seemed strongest. The whispers would stop for a few days after each offering, then return more insistent than before. The final entry was dated March 3, 2015. It is not in my head. The walls bleed when it is hungry. I have to go into the woods tonight. If I do not come back, burn this house down. My wife and I sat in stunned silence after reading that last entry. I pulled up my laptop and searched for Isabella Scott in Terre Haute. The results appeared immediately. Missing person case from March 2015. Isabella Scott, 28 years old, vanished from her home on Sycamore Lane. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse and phone were on the kitchen counter. The door was unlocked. Police found no signs of foul play or struggle. The working theory was that Isabella, who had been undergoing treatment for psychiatric issues, had wandered into the woods during a mental health crisis and succumbed to exposure. Searchers combed the forest for weeks. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace of Isabella Scott. The case went cold. The house went into foreclosure, and for 9 years it sat empty. We still had the metal lockbox. It took me 20 minutes and a pair of bolt cutters to get it open. Inside were Polaroid photographs, dozens of them documenting the interior of the house. But these were not normal photographs. Every image showed something wrong. In a photo of the living room, faces appeared in the wood grain of the floorboards, dozens of twisted faces screaming silently. In a photo of the kitchen, shadows pooled in the corners, too dark and too solid to be natural. One photograph showed Isabella's bedroom. She had taken it using the mirror above her dresser. In the reflection, Isabella stood alone taking the photo. But behind her, clearly visible in the doorframe, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, completely black. It had no features, no face, just a vaguely humanoid shape that seemed to absorb all the light around it. Isabella had been alone in that room when she took the photograph. The cameras showed no one else in the house, but the Polaroid captured something standing right behind her. I took everything to the Terre Haute Police Department the next morning. The detective who had worked Isabella's case, a man in his 50s named Detective Marsh, agreed to meet with me. I showed him the journals, the photographs, the lockbox. He remembered the case well. Isabella had called them repeatedly about an intruder in her house. They had investigated thoroughly and found nothing. After she disappeared, they searched the property multiple times. They interviewed neighbors, examined her phone and computer, looked for any indication of where she might have gone. The forest behind the property was searched by cadaver dogs and volunteer teams. Nothing. Detective Marsh examined the Polaroids with a magnifying glass. He asked if I had altered them in any way. I had not. He took them to the forensics lab for analysis. The photographs were authentic, not digitally manipulated or doctored. There was no explanation for the figure in the mirror or the faces in the floorboards. The case was reopened briefly. Police conducted another search of the woods behind our property, this time with ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging equipment. They found no remains, no evidence of burial, nothing that suggested Isabella had died in those woods. Detective Marsh told me honestly that without new evidence or witnesses, there was nothing more they could do. Isabella Scott's disappearance would remain an unsolved missing person case. He recommended we continue with our renovations and try not to dwell on the history. Easy for him to say. He did not have to sleep in the house where a woman had documented months of psychological torment before vanishing into thin air. We should have sold the house immediately. We should have walked away from our investment and counted ourselves lucky to escape. But we had already sunk $30,000 into renovations. We had quit our apartment lease. My wife was 7 months pregnant and we needed a place to live before the baby came. So we stayed, and that is when we started experiencing what Isabella had described in her journals. It began subtly, objects moving when we were not looking, doors opening on their own, the sensation of being watched. I installed security cameras throughout the house, the same ones Isabella had used. The footage showed the same phenomena, shadows moving independently, furniture shifting. And late at night, when my wife was asleep and I reviewed the recordings, I saw the figure. Standing in doorways, standing at the foot of our bed, watching, always watching. We live here still, though I do not know for how long. My wife wants to leave. She says the house is making her sick. She has nightmares about the figure, dreams where it stands over our baby's crib, whispering in that unknown language Isabella described. I hear the whispers too, especially late at night when the house is quiet. They come from inside the walls, a constant murmuring that sounds almost like conversation. Sometimes I stand at the edge of the woods where Isabella must have walked that last night, and I swear I can feel something watching me from between the trees. Something patient. Something hungry. Detective Marsh told me Isabella's case will likely never be solved, but I think whatever happened to her is still happening in this house. I think the presence that drove her into those woods is still here, still hungry, still waiting. And I am terrified that my family will be next to understand what Isabella meant when she wrote, "Feed it." We have 3 months before the baby arrives. 3 months to decide whether we stay in this house or abandon everything we have invested. But standing here now, reading Isabella's final words again, I know what the answer has to be. This house should have been burned down years ago, and I am starting to understand why. They asked me to tell you exactly what Harry did to me on Interstate 65 that November night. The prosecutor said my testimony could save lives, so I will tell you everything, even the parts that still wake me screaming. It was November 12th, 2019. I had been visiting my sister in Louisville for the weekend, helping her move into a new apartment after her divorce. We spent the entire day hauling boxes and furniture up 3 flights of stairs, and by the time we finished, it was almost 10:30 at night. I needed to get back to Indianapolis for work the next morning, so I said my goodbyes and started the drive north on Interstate 65. The weather had turned cold that week, the first real cold snap of the season. Rain came down in sheets, the kind of heavy autumn rain that makes your windshield wipers useless even on the highest setting. Traffic was light. Most people had the sense to stay home on a night like this. I was about 40 minutes into the drive, somewhere between Seymour and Edinburgh, when I heard the noise. A grinding metallic sound coming from under the hood of my Honda. The engine light flickered on. Then the car started shaking, vibrating so badly I could feel it in my teeth. I eased off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking orange in the rain. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do. I knew nothing about cars. I could change a tire if I had to, but engine problems were completely beyond me. I pulled out my phone to call roadside assistance and saw I had only 1 bar of service. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dark fields and distant tree lines. The nearest exit was probably 5 miles behind me. That was when the headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A car pulled up behind mine, stopping about 20 feet back. A figure got out, illuminated briefly by the interior light. A man. He was wearing a rain jacket with the hood up. He walked toward my car, waving in what seemed like a friendly gesture. I rolled down my window about 2 inches, just enough to hear him over the rain. "Having trouble?" he shouted. I nodded, still wary. "Engine just started making a terrible noise. I do not know what is wrong with it." "I am a mechanic," he said, his voice friendly and reassuring. "Just heading home from a job in Louisville. Want me to take a look? Might be something simple." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to trust a stranger on a dark highway. But what choice did I have? I could sit here for hours waiting for a tow truck, or I could let this man look at my engine for 30 seconds. If it was something simple, maybe I could get back on the road. If not, at least I would know what I was dealing with. "That would be really helpful," I said. "Thank you," he smiled. "No problem. Pop the hood." I pulled the hood release and watched in my side mirror as the man walked to the front of my car. He lifted the hood and leaned in, using his phone flashlight to examine the engine. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, rain drumming on the roof, telling myself this was fine. This was just a good Samaritan helping a stranded motorist. Nothing to worry about. Then the man did something strange. He reached into my engine with both hands and pulled something loose. I heard a snap. He held up what looked like a thick wire or cable, showing it to me through the windshield. "Found your problem," he called out. This spark plug wire came loose. Happens sometimes on older Hondas. Relief washed over me. A loose wire, that was all. He could probably just plug it back in and I would be on my way. But then I saw his expression change. The friendly smile disappeared. He walked to my driver's side window, still holding the wire, and his eyes were completely different. Cold. Predatory. That was when I understood. The wire had not come loose. He had disconnected it. And now he was standing between me and my only means of escape. Before I could react, Harry grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. I had not locked it. Why would I lock it when I thought he was helping me? He reached in and grabbed my arm with a grip so strong it felt like my bones would snap. I screamed and tried to pull away, but he was impossibly strong. He dragged me out of the car, my feet scrabbling on the wet pavement. I fought him, punching and clawing at his face, but it was like hitting concrete. He shoved me toward his vehicle, a dark sedan I had barely noticed in the rain. The trunk was already open, waiting. "Please," I begged. "Please do not do this. I have money. I have a family. Please." He said nothing. His face was blank, emotionless, like he was performing a routine task. He lifted me, and I am not a small person. He lifted me like I weighed nothing and threw me into the trunk. I landed hard on something plastic that crinkled beneath me. The lid slammed shut and I was in complete darkness. I heard the locks click. Then the engine started and we were moving. The trunk was lined with plastic sheeting, the heavy kind contractors use. My hands found duct tape, zip ties, a coil of rope, tools scattered around me, a hammer, something that felt like a knife. My mind was screaming, but I forced myself to focus. I had to get out. I had to survive. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely move, but I started working on the zip ties, pulling at them, trying to find a weakness. The car drove for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 40 minutes. Every turn, every bump, I bounced against the hard metal of the trunk. Finally, the car stopped. The engine cut off. I heard footsteps on gravel. The trunk opened and Harry stood there, rain still falling, backlit by some kind of building behind him. A barn. We were at an old barn in the middle of nowhere. He grabbed me and dragged me inside. The interior smelled like rotting hay and mold. In the center of the space sat a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor. He forced me into it and began securing me with zip ties, pulling them so tight they cut into my wrists and ankles. I begged him the entire time. I cried, I pleaded. He never responded, never changed expression. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at me the way someone might look at a painting they had just hung. "You are number 11, he said finally. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I thought you should know that." Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of Polaroid photographs. He flipped through them slowly, holding each one up so I could see. Faces, women's faces. Some were screaming, some were crying, some looked already dead. I recognized two of them from missing person reports I had seen on the news. Sarah Chen from Bloomington, Angela Rodriguez from Columbus. Harry had taken them, he had killed them. And now I was going to be photograph number 11. I have been doing this for 5 years, he said, still flipping through the photos like they were vacation snapshots. Started small, learned what works and what does not. The highway is perfect. So many stranded motorists, so many people who need help. You were easy. He told me about his process then in horrifying detail. How he scouted for targets, how he disabled their vehicles, how he brought them here to this barn he owned on property in the middle of nowhere between Seymour and Columbus. How he kept them alive for days sometimes, taking his time. He was calm and methodical, like he was explaining how to change a tire. This was not rage or passion. This was cold, calculated sadism performed by a man who felt absolutely nothing for the people he destroyed. Then Harry left the barn. He said he needed to prepare things and would be back in a few minutes. The moment he was gone, I started working on the zip ties again. Adrenaline gave me strength I did not know I had. I twisted and pulled, ignoring the pain as the plastic cut into my skin. One of the ties was slightly loose. I focused on that one, working it back and forth until my wrist was slick with blood. The blood helped. It made the plastic slippery. I pulled harder, feeling the tie give just a little, then a little more. Finally, my right hand slipped free. I worked faster now, untying my other wrist, then my ankles. I was free, but I heard footsteps returning, heavy boots on gravel. Harry was coming back. I looked around frantically for a weapon and saw an old crowbar leaning against the wall, rusted but solid. I grabbed it and pressed myself against the wall beside the door. The door swung open. Harry entered carrying something wrapped in cloth, something that made metallic sounds when he moved. He saw the empty chair and froze. That split second of confusion saved my life. I swung the crowbar with every ounce of strength I had left. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. Harry went down, blood streaming from his temple. But he did not stay down. He got back up, blood covering half his face, and he was smiling. He started laughing, a horrible sound that barely seemed human. "Fight back," he said. "That is good. That makes it better." He lunged at me. I ran. I burst through the barn door into the rain and darkness, not knowing where I was or which direction to go. I just ran. Behind me, I could hear Harry crashing through the undergrowth, still laughing, taunting me. "I know these woods," he shouted. "You cannot escape." But I kept running. Branches tore at my clothes and face. My feet sank into mud. I fell twice but forced myself back up. Then I saw lights in the distance, the highway. I ran toward those lights like they were salvation itself, lungs burning, legs screaming. I burst out of the tree line directly in front of an oncoming semi-truck. The driver slammed on his brakes, horn blaring. I ran to the driver's side door, beating on it, screaming for help. The driver, a man in his 50s, took one look at me covered in blood and mud and grabbed his radio. He called 911 immediately. Police arrived within 10 minutes. I gave them directions to the barn as best I could remember. They found Harry trying to flee in his sedan. They arrested him and searched the property. What they found made national news. The remains of 7 women were buried on the land. The Polaroids documented at least 15 victims. Some were identified from the photos. Others remain unknown to this day. Harry had been hunting Interstate 65 since 2015, targeting stranded motorists, and nobody had connected the cases until I survived to tell my story. Harry was convicted on 8 counts of murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing hearing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood in that courtroom, looked Harry directly in the eyes, and told him he did not break me. I told him I would spend the rest of my life honoring the memories of the women he killed. And I told him that every day he spends in that cell, knowing I survived and destroyed his operation, was justice. Harry sat in that courtroom and smiled at me. He showed no remorse, no humanity, but I am still here. And he will never hurt anyone again. I had been walking for 3 days when the state trooper found me on Route 37 outside of Bloomington. I could not tell him where I came from, who I was running from, or even my own last name at first. All I could say was, "Poppy is not my real name, and they are still in the woods." The trooper took me to the hospital in Bloomington, where I spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward, slowly recovering my ability to speak about what had happened. The social worker assigned to my case, a kind woman named Patricia, helped me piece together fragments of memory that I had buried deep in my mind as a survival mechanism. I remembered arriving at the commune in late summer of 2016, answering an advertisement I had seen on a spiritual wellness forum online. The post described a community of awakened souls seeking to live in harmony with nature and each other, far from the corruption and noise of modern civilization. It sounded like exactly what I needed after my divorce, after losing my job, after my mother's death left me with nothing but debt and emptiness. The ad promised purpose, belonging, and spiritual transformation. It delivered something far darker. The property was located on 200 acres of heavily forested land in Brown County, about 20 miles from the nearest town. 23 adults and 11 children lived there when I arrived, all of them part of what they called New Eden. The leader was a man in his late 50s who everyone called the Shepherd. His real name was Marcus Webb, though I did not learn that until much later. The Shepherd had kind eyes and a gentle voice. He spoke about love and consciousness and the interconnectedness of all living things. He made you feel seen, valued, like you mattered in ways the outside world had never recognized. Looking back now, I understand that he was a predator who had perfected the art of identifying broken people and making them dependent on his approval. The first year was peaceful. We lived in hand-built cabins scattered throughout the property, grew our own food, spent hours in meditation and group discussions about spirituality and personal growth. There was no electricity, no running water beyond a well, no contact with the outside world. We surrendered our phones and identification documents when we arrived, part of what the Shepherd called releasing our false identities. I was renamed Poppy during a ceremony where the Shepherd said he had received divine guidance about each person's true spiritual name. I accepted it willingly. I wanted to be someone new, someone unburdened by all the failures and pain of my old life. But in the winter of 2017, things began to change. The Shepherd started receiving what he called divine instructions during ritual ceremonies held in a cave on the property. The cave was deep in the woods, a natural limestone formation that opened into a large chamber. The Shepherd would go into the cave alone during the full moon, sometimes staying for hours, and emerge with messages he claimed came directly from a higher consciousness. At first, the messages were benign. We needed to pray more, fast on certain days, show more devotion to our spiritual work. But gradually the instructions became darker. The Shepherd said we needed to purify ourselves through suffering. That comfort and ease were traps that kept our souls trapped in lower vibrations. He introduced what he called purification rituals. We would fast for days at a time, sleep only a few hours each night, work in the gardens until our hands bled. Anyone who complained or questioned was subjected to additional purification, locked in a root cellar alone until they accepted that their resistance was a spiritual failing. Then the shepherd said the children needed to be tested. He claimed that children were closest to the divine source and needed to prove their purity through trials. The first testing ceremony happened in January of 2018. The shepherd took a 7-year-old boy named Michael into the cave and left him there overnight alone with no food, no water, no warmth. It was 12 degrees that night. Michael's mother, a woman named Rachel, sobbed and begged the shepherd to bring her son back. But he told her she lacked faith. He said Michael was being blessed with an opportunity to commune directly with the higher consciousness. When the shepherd retrieved Michael the next morning, the boy was hypothermic and barely conscious. Instead of seeking medical help, the shepherd held a healing ceremony where we all prayed over Michael. The boy recovered, though he was never quite the same afterward. He stopped speaking and would spend hours staring at nothing. More children were tested over the following months. Each ceremony became more extreme. Children were left in the cave for longer periods, denied food for days. One girl, 8 years old and tiny for her age, became violently ill after a testing ceremony in March of 2018. Her name was Emma. Her parents begged the shepherd to let them take her to a hospital, but he refused. He said modern medicine would corrupt her spiritual progress, that her illness was part of the purification process. Emma died 3 days later. I held her mother while she wailed, a sound so raw and broken it barely seemed human. We buried Emma in an unmarked grave deep in the woods. The shepherd said she had not died but ascended, that her soul had achieved a level of purity the rest of us should aspire to. He made us celebrate her death as a blessing. 2 more children died over the next year under similar circumstances. A boy named Joshua who was subjected to a fasting ritual that lasted 9 days. A girl named Sophia who was locked in the cave during a thunderstorm and died of exposure. Their parents, so broken and indoctrinated by this point, accepted the shepherd's explanation that these deaths were ascensions. Anyone who questioned was punished. A man named Thomas spoke up after Sophia died, said this had gone too far, that we needed to call the authorities. The shepherd ordered Thomas locked in the root cellar for 2 weeks. When we finally pulled him out, Thomas was delirious and docile, all resistance beaten out of him through isolation and starvation. I knew this was wrong. I knew we were participating in something evil, but fear and shame kept me silent. The shepherd had convinced us that the outside world would never understand our spiritual work, that if authorities came, they would tear families apart and imprison us all. He said we had to trust the process, that these sacrifices were necessary for the collective awakening he had been promised in his visions. And I, like the others, was too afraid and too broken to resist. We had surrendered everything to be part of New Eden. Leaving would mean admitting we had been fooled, that we had participated in the deaths of children, that we had wasted years of our lives serving a madman. So we stayed. We kept our heads down. We told ourselves that the shepherd knew something we did not, that his connection to the divine was real even when the evidence screamed otherwise. In late 2020, the shepherd announced the final purification. He said a cosmic event was coming, a great separation where those who had proven their worthiness would ascend to a higher plane of existence. But to achieve this collective ascension, we all needed to drink from the sacred cup during a special ceremony. He spent weeks preparing us, telling us this was what everything had been building toward, that we should feel honored to be chosen for this transcendence. I did not understand what he meant until the night of the ceremony. We gathered in the main hall, all 20 adults who remained. The children were in their cabins, supposedly being prepared by the shepherd's most trusted followers. The shepherd brought out a large bowl filled with liquid. He said it contained sacred herbs that would open our consciousness and allow our souls to leave our bodies and join the eternal. I looked around at the others. Some were crying with joy, some looked terrified but resigned. And I suddenly understood with horrible clarity that the shepherd was about to murder everyone in this room. The sacred cup was poison. This was not ascension, this was mass suicide. I watched the shepherd pour the liquid into smaller cups and begin distributing them. People were drinking, actually drinking. I saw a woman named Margaret take the cup to her lips and swallow. Then another person, then another. Panic exploded in my chest. I grabbed a 4-year-old girl named Lily who was standing near me, one of the youngest children, and I ran. I heard the shepherd shouting behind me, heard footsteps pursuing us, but I did not stop. I ran into the woods in complete darkness, Lily crying in my arms, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I ran until I could not hear the voices anymore. I ran until Lily and I collapsed in a ravine, and we hid there until dawn. When light came, I found a dirt road and followed it east. 3 days later, covered in mud and insect bites and barely conscious, the trooper found us. Police and FBI raided the New Eden compound that same day. They found 16 bodies in the main hall. The shepherd and 6 others were still alive but severely poisoned. They were arrested and hospitalized. In the woods, investigators found the graves of 3 children who had died during the testing ceremonies. The shepherd, whose real name was Marcus Webb, was charged with multiple counts of murder, child abuse, and false imprisonment. His trial revealed a history of running similar operations in Montana and Oregon under different names. He had been manipulating and destroying vulnerable people for over 2 decades. I testified at his trial. I told them everything, even the parts that made me complicit. I described the children who died while I did nothing. I admitted my cowardice, my silence, my participation in rituals I knew were harmful. The prosecutor said I was a victim too, but that does not ease the guilt. 3 children are buried in those woods because I was too afraid to act sooner. 8 adults died believing they were ascending to paradise because I did not speak up when I knew the shepherd was leading us toward death. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 60 years in prison. But the real sentence is the one I carry every day, knowing that if I had been braver, if I had trusted my instincts earlier, those people might still be alive. My real name is Sarah. I am 34 years old, and I will spend the rest of my life asking myself if I could have saved them. The detective slid the external hard drive across the table and told me they needed me to watch everything on it. They found it in Arthur's apartment after he vanished. What I saw on those videos changed everything we thought we knew about his disappearance. My brother Arthur Mills disappeared from his apartment in Evansville on March 18, 2023. He was 34 years old, lived alone in Unit 212 at Brookside Apartments on the east side of the city, and worked from home as a graphic designer for an advertising firm in Chicago. Arthur was the kind of person who kept to himself. After our parents died in a car accident 7 years earlier, he became even more withdrawn, preferring the company of his computer screen to actual human interaction. We talked maybe once a month, brief phone calls where he assured me he was fine and I pretended to believe him. The Evansville Police Department called me on March 27th, 9 days after Arthur was last seen. His landlord had done a welfare check after Arthur missed rent payment, something he had never done in the 3 years he lived there. When the landlord entered the apartment using his master key, he found it exactly as Arthur had left it. The computer was still on, humming quietly in the home office. A coffee cup sat on the desk, still containing liquid, though it had gone cold and developed a film on top. The television was playing Netflix on a loop, some nature documentary about deep-sea creatures. But Arthur was gone. The front door had been locked from the inside, deadbolt engaged. The windows were all locked. The sliding glass door to the small balcony was secured with a wooden dowel in the track. There was no other way out of the apartment. Yet Arthur had somehow vanished from a locked room. The police investigation found no evidence of foul play. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone else had been in the apartment. Arthur's wallet was on the kitchen counter. His phone was charging on the nightstand. His car was in its assigned parking space. Everything suggested Arthur had simply stood up from his desk and ceased to exist. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Detective Morrison, admitted they had no leads and no idea how someone could disappear from a locked apartment on the second floor of a building with security cameras covering all exits. That was when they found the external hard drive hidden in Arthur's desk drawer, labeled in his handwriting. Evidence. Keep safe. Detective Morrison sat me down in an interview room at the police station and explained what they had found on the drive. Security camera footage. Dozens of files time-stamped and organized by date showing the interior of Arthur's apartment from multiple angles. Arthur had installed hidden cameras throughout his living space. Cameras in smoke detectors, cameras in the clock on his wall, cameras concealed in the bookshelf in his living room. The footage went back 6 weeks, starting in early February, and documented increasingly disturbing events that Arthur had been experiencing alone in that apartment. I spent the next 4 hours watching my brother's descent into terror. The early videos from February showed Arthur living normally, working at his computer, making dinner, watching television, going to bed. But around the 3rd week of February, strange things started happening. In one video, Arthur left a coffee mug on the kitchen counter and walked into the bathroom. The camera had a clear view of the counter. While Arthur was gone, the mug slid across the counter on its own, moving about 6 inches to the left. No vibration, no explanation, just smooth movement as if an invisible hand had pushed it. Arthur returned, saw the mug had moved, and picked it up, examining it with confusion. He looked around the apartment like he was trying to figure out if he had misremembered where he had placed it. The incidents escalated. A book Arthur had been reading disappeared from his nightstand and reappeared 3 days later on a shelf in his living room. He found it during a video where he was clearly searching for something, pulling cushions off the couch and checking under furniture. When he found the book on the shelf, he stood there staring at it for almost a full minute, and I could see the fear on his face even through the grainy footage. He knew he had not put it there. He knew something was wrong. By early March, the footage showed Arthur had stopped sleeping well. He would lie in bed with the lights on, staring at the ceiling, clearly terrified. The bedroom camera captured what he had been afraid of. A figure appeared in his doorway around 2:30 in the morning. The figure was humanoid in shape, but completely black, like a shadow given 3-dimensional form. It had no features, no face, just a silhouette that was darker than the surrounding darkness. The figure stood in the doorway for hours, completely motionless, just watching Arthur sleep. When dawn light started filtering through the windows, the figure would fade away, dissolving into nothing. This happened multiple nights. Arthur never woke during these visitations. The figure just watched him hour after hour, perfectly still. Arthur must have reviewed his own footage and seen what was happening while he slept. The videos from mid-March showed him installing more cameras, changing all the locks on his doors and windows, placing a wooden dowel in the sliding door track. He recorded himself speaking directly to the camera, documenting what he had experienced. His voice was shaking. "I do not know what this is. I have checked for carbon monoxide. I have had an electrician check all the wiring. I am not imagining this. Something is in my apartment. Something is watching me. The police think I am crazy. My therapist wants to put me on antipsychotics, but I have it on camera. This is real." The final video files were the most disturbing. Arthur had set up motion sensor lights throughout the apartment and positioned cameras to cover every possible angle. The last video was time-stamped March 18th. 3:47 ante-meridium. The bedroom camera showed Arthur sleeping or trying to sleep with all the lights on. The shadow figure appeared in the doorway as it had done before. But this time, something different happened. Every camera in the apartment went to static simultaneously. Pure white noise filled the screen for approximately 14 seconds. When the video feed returned, Arthur's bed was empty. The covers were thrown back like he had gotten up, but Arthur was not in frame. I watched the next 4 hours of footage with growing horror. The cameras showed an empty apartment, no movement, no sound beyond the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a wall clock. Then, at 7:32 in the morning, the front door of the apartment opened, on its own. The deadbolt turned, the handle rotated, and the door swung inward. The cameras clearly showed that no one was there. The door just opened, as if invisible hands had unlocked it and pushed it wide. The door remained open for 3 minutes, then closed again with the same supernatural precision. The deadbolt clicked back into place. And that was the last interesting thing the cameras recorded before the landlord entered the apartment 9 days later. Detective Morrison initially suspected Arthur had staged the footage and disappeared voluntarily, perhaps trying to create some kind of viral video or hoax. But forensics experts examined the videos and authenticated them. They were not edited or manipulated. The timestamps matched the metadata. Everything suggested the footage was genuine documentation of paranormal activity. Morrison asked if Arthur had any history of mental illness or drug use. He did not. Arthur was sober, rational, and had no psychiatric history beyond some depression after our parents died. He was not the type to create elaborate hoaxes. He was a quiet graphic designer who paid his bills on time and kept to himself. I started researching the history of Brookside Apartments and found something that made my blood run cold. Arthur was not the first person to disappear from Unit 212. A woman named Rachel Simmons had lived there from 2017 to 2019. She vanished in August of 2019 under nearly identical circumstances. Locked apartment, no signs of struggle, no indication of where she had gone. Her case was ruled a voluntary missing person and eventually went cold. I dug deeper and found 3 more cases connected to that specific apartment going back to 1998. 5 people total, including Arthur, had disappeared from Unit 212 at Brookside Apartments over 25 years. All of them vanished from locked rooms with no explanation. Arthur's case remains open but unsolved. No body has been found. No suspects have been identified. The apartment building management claimed they had no knowledge of the previous disappearances, though the property records clearly showed the pattern. The unit was sealed by police as an active crime scene, but after 6 months they had to release it. The building owners tried to rent it again. I filed a restraining order to keep them from putting anyone else in that apartment, arguing that it was demonstrably dangerous. The judge agreed, at least temporarily. Other tenants at Brookside reported strange occurrences after word spread about Arthur's disappearance. People on the second floor heard footsteps in the hallway late at night when no one was there. Residents reported shadows moving past their windows. Several tenants broke their leases and moved out within weeks, unwilling to live in a building where people vanished from locked rooms. The property value plummeted. The building is now half empty and Unit 212 sits vacant, police tape still stretched across the doorway. I hired private investigators to look into the property history. They discovered that Brookside Apartments was built in 1994 on the site of a former psychiatric hospital that had operated from 1932 to 1989. The hospital had a dark history of patient abuse and unexplained deaths. Records showed that over 100 patients died in the facility, many under suspicious circumstances that were never fully investigated. The wing where Unit 212 now stands was the maximum security ward where the most violent and disturbed patients were housed. The investigators found old floor plans that showed Unit 212 occupies almost the exact footprint of what was once a solitary confinement cell. I have watched those videos 100 times looking for something rational, some explanation that does not involve the supernatural. But I keep coming back to the last frames. Arthur's empty bed, the door opening on its own. My brother was taken by something that does not follow the rules of physical reality. Something that has been taking people from that apartment for 25 years and probably longer. The police tell me to accept that Arthur is gone, to move on and grieve. But I cannot move on when I do not know what happened to him. Arthur discovered something in that apartment, something that did not want to be discovered, and now he is gone, just like the others before him. I will not stop searching. I will not stop demanding answers. Because somewhere, in some way I do not understand, my brother is still out there, and I have to believe there is a way to bring him back. After 30 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Behavioral Analysis Unit, I thought I had seen every variation of human evil. Then I was assigned the case of Daisy Chapman, and I realized there are still depths I cannot comprehend. My name is irrelevant to this story. What matters is that I spent 3 decades developing criminal profiles for the most disturbing cases in American law enforcement. I interviewed serial killers in maximum security prisons. I examined crime scenes that would haunt most people for the rest of their lives. I learned to think like predators, to understand their motivations and patterns. But in all those years, I never encountered anything like Daisy Chapman. The case began in South Bend, Indiana, in the spring of 2017. A young professional named Amanda Peterson was found dead in her apartment on April 3rd. She was 28 years old, worked as a physical therapist, and lived alone in a quiet neighborhood near downtown. Her body was discovered by her sister, who had come by after Amanda failed to show up for brunch. The sister used a spare key to enter and found Amanda sitting in her living room armchair, dressed in casual clothing, a book open in her lap, a cup of tea on the side table. For a moment, the sister thought Amanda had fallen asleep reading. Then she saw the blood. Amanda's throat had been cut with surgical precision, a single slash so clean and efficient that it suggested either medical training or extensive practice. The medical examiner determined she had died quickly, likely within seconds of the attack. But what made the scene unusual was the staging. Amanda had been posed very deliberately. The book in her lap was open to page 217. The teacup beside her contained cold chamomile tea. Everything about the scene suggested the killer had arranged Amanda carefully after death, taking time to create a specific tableau. There was no forced entry, no signs of struggle, no evidence that Amanda had tried to defend herself. Either she had been killed so quickly she could not react, or she had known and trusted her killer enough to let them get close. The South Bend Police Department investigated thoroughly but found no suspects and no clear motive. Amanda had no known enemies, no dangerous ex-partners, no involvement in criminal activity. She was, by all accounts, a kind person who lived a quiet life. The case might have remained an isolated tragedy if not for the second murder 3 months later. In July of 2017, another young woman named Rebecca Thomas was found dead in her apartment under nearly identical circumstances. Same pose, sitting in a chair with a book open in her lap. Same cup of chamomile tea on the side table. Same precise slash across the throat. And disturbingly, the book was open to page 217, though it was a completely different book than the one found with Amanda. This could not be coincidence. South Bend had a serial killer operating with a very specific signature. By the time I was brought in to consult in early 2018, there had been 5 victims, all killed in the same manner, all staged identically. I spent 2 weeks in South Bend reviewing crime scene photographs, reading police reports, and examining every piece of evidence. The pattern was clear. The killer was recreating a specific moment, something deeply personal and significant. The care taken in posing the victims, the domestic nature of the staging, the choice of chamomile tea and books all suggested this was about memory rather than sexual sadism or power. The killer was trying to recreate something from their past, perhaps a moment of comfort or connection. And they were using these victims as surrogates for someone else. What struck me most was the attention to detail. Each victim had been washed after death, their hair brushed, their clothing adjusted to remove any wrinkles or disorder. This was not rage, this was devotion. The killer genuinely cared about presenting these women in a specific way. That level of care is extremely rare in serial homicide, especially in cases involving this degree of violence. I reviewed the statistical data on female serial killers, which represent only about 8% of all serial killers in the United States. Female serial killers typically kill for profit or out of a warped sense of mercy, rarely engaging in the ritualistic staging behaviors more common in male offenders. But everything about these crime scenes suggested a female perpetrator. The domestic setting, the nurturing aspects of the staging, the lack of sexual violence all pointed toward a woman. I convinced the South Bend Police Department to expand their suspect pool to include female offenders. We started searching through criminal databases for women with histories of violent behavior, particularly matricide or domestic violence against family members. That search led us to Daisy Chapman. In 2003, when Daisy was 19 years old, she had been arrested for murdering her adoptive mother. The circumstances were eerily similar to what we were seeing now. Daisy's mother had been found in her living room, sitting in her favorite chair with a book in her lap and a cup of tea beside her. Her throat had been cut. Daisy had confessed to the killing, claiming years of emotional and physical abuse had driven her to snap during their nightly routine of reading together before bed. Daisy spent 12 years in psychiatric facilities and medium security prison. She participated in therapy, expressed remorse, and was deemed successfully rehabilitated by multiple psychiatric evaluations. She was released in 2015 with a clean record and relocated to South Bend to start a new life. I requested surveillance on Daisy Chapman immediately. She worked at the South Bend Public Library, lived alone in a modest apartment, and by all external measures, appeared to be living a quiet, normal life. But when we began tracking her movements, we discovered she had befriended several young women through the library. She would invite them to her apartment for tea and book discussions, building relationships based on shared interests in literature. We obtained a warrant to search Daisy's apartment in September of 2018. What we found in her basement removed any doubt about her guilt. Photographs of all 7 victims were pinned to the walls, along with newspaper clippings about their murders. Personal items taken from the crime scenes were displayed on shelves like religious relics, a hairbrush that belonged to Amanda Peterson, reading glasses taken from victim number 3, a necklace from victim number 5, but most disturbing were the journals. Daisy had documented each murder in painstaking detail, writing about them not as violent crimes but as acts of love and correction. Her entries revealed a fractured psyche obsessed with recreating the night she killed her adoptive mother. Daisy believed that if she could stage that evening perfectly, if she could find the right person to play the role of her mother, then somehow the universe would rewrite history and her mother would forgive her from beyond death. Each victim represented another attempt to get it right, but none of them matched her mother closely enough. None of them satisfied whatever need was driving Daisy to kill again and again. She wrote about victim number 6, a woman named Lauren, with particular frustration. Lauren's hair was the wrong color and she held the book too stiffly. She did not relax into the moment. I tried so hard to help her understand what I needed, but she kept crying and it ruined everything. Mother never cried like that. We arrested Daisy at the library on September 27th, 2018. She was shelving books in the biography section when 3 officers approached her. Daisy's only response was to ask if we had seen her work, if we understood what she had been trying to accomplish. During her interrogation, I sat across from her in a small room at the South Bend Police Department. Daisy spoke about the murders with the detached tone of an artist discussing failed projects. She described the care she took in selecting victims who resembled her mother in age, build, and coloring. She explained how she befriended them over weeks or months, earning their trust, learning their habits, waiting for the right moment to be invited into their homes. The methodology was consistent. Daisy would visit under the guise of friendship, bringing tea that she had drugged with sedatives. Once the victim was unconscious, Daisy would arrange them in the chair, position the book, prepare the teacup. Then she would wait for them to wake up, disoriented and helpless, before she performed the killing. But even that moment of violence Daisy described as gentle and necessary. "I was very careful," she told me. "I did not want them to suffer. I wanted them to understand this was an act of love. I was giving them the chance to help me fix what happened with Mother. That is a gift." When I asked Daisy if she felt any remorse for the 10 women she had killed, she looked at me with genuine confusion. "But I was gentle with them," she said. "I gave them peace. I read to them for hours after they died. I stayed with them so they would not be alone." How is that not love? There was no manipulation in her voice, no attempt to deceive. Daisy genuinely believed she had shown her victims kindness. In her fractured reality, murder was an act of devotion rather than violence. The psychiatric evaluations conducted after her arrest diagnosed Daisy with severe dissociative identity disorder, likely stemming from extreme childhood trauma that occurred before her adoption at age 7. Her adoption records were sealed and her biological family history remains unknown. But there is strong evidence that Daisy suffered abuse so severe it permanently damaged her ability to process emotions and form healthy attachments. The relationship with her adoptive mother, while outwardly normal, became the focal point of all Daisy's emotional needs. When she killed her mother in a moment of rage at age 19, Daisy's psyche fractured completely. She has spent the past 2 decades trapped in that single moment, unable to move forward, unable to accept what she had done, desperately trying to undo the irreversible. Daisy Chapman pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. She showed no emotion during the trial proceedings, even when family members of her victims gave impact statements describing the holes left in their lives. Daisy stared straight ahead with blank eyes, occasionally writing notes to her attorney about minor details in the testimony. She was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. She currently resides in a maximum security psychiatric facility where she will spend the rest of her life. The case fundamentally changed how the Federal Bureau of Investigation approaches female serial offenders. I have published multiple papers analyzing Daisy's psychological profile and the warning signs that were missed during her initial rehabilitation. But what haunts me most is not the violence Daisy committed. I have seen far worse in terms of brutality and victim count. What keeps me awake is the twisted devotion that motivated her. Daisy murdered 10 innocent women because she loved her mother so much she could not escape the moment she killed her. That perversion of love into something murderous and obsessive represents a type of evil I still struggle to comprehend. Most killers feel nothing or feel satisfaction in their crimes. Daisy felt love, And that, more than anything else in my 30-year career, terrifies me in ways I cannot fully articulate. This is episode 47 of Midwest Mysteries, and today I am investigating the case that made me start this podcast in the first place. My cousin Jacob disappeared from Greenwood Park in Indianapolis in 2011. The police closed his case as a runaway. But I know what I saw that day, and I know Jacob did not run away. I started this podcast 3 years ago because I could not let Jacob's disappearance fade into obscurity the way the authorities wanted it to. Jacob Allen was 14 years old when he vanished. I was 13. We were at Greenwood Park on July 4th, 2011, part of a larger group of neighborhood kids whose parents had gathered for the annual Independence Day celebration. It was a perfect summer day, the kind you remember your whole life for all the wrong reasons. Greenwood Park is a large community park on the south side of Indianapolis. Probably 200 acres of open fields, playgrounds, pavilions, and thick woods that border the eastern edge of the property. On holidays like the 4th of July, hundreds of families descend on the park for picnics and fireworks. The adults had claimed the main pavilion area, setting up grills and coolers while we kids roamed freely. There were 6 of us that afternoon. Jacob, myself, and 4 other kids from our street, all between the ages of 12 and 15. We spent most of the day playing frisbee and swimming in the public pool, but as evening approached and we got bored, Jacob suggested we explore the woods. The woods at Greenwood Park have always had a reputation in the neighborhood. Kids told stories about strange things happening in there. People getting lost even though the forest was only about half a mile deep before it hit residential streets on the other side. There were rumors of an old maintenance shed deep in the trees where homeless people sometimes stayed, though none of us had ever actually seen it. Jacob dared us to find the shed. He said he had heard from older kids at school that it was covered in weird graffiti and had been abandoned since the 80s. The challenge was irresistible to a group of bored teenagers looking for adventure. We entered the woods around 7 post-meridium. The sun was still up but sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the oak and maple trees. The temperature dropped noticeably once we got under the canopy. We walked single file along a barely visible trail, pushing through undergrowth and ducking under low branches. After maybe 15 minutes of walking, we found it. The maintenance shed sat in a small clearing exactly as described. It was a concrete block structure, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a rusted metal door hanging partially open. Vines had grown up the walls and across the roof. The whole thing looked like it had been forgotten by time. Jacob went in first. He always went first. That was Jacob's personality. Bold, fearless, the kind of kid who never backed down from a dare. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, using his phone as a flashlight. The rest of us followed, our own phones illuminating the dark interior. The shed was mostly empty. Old tools rusted in a corner. Empty beer cans and fast food wrappers littered the floor, evidence that people still used this place occasionally. But what caught our attention were the symbols carved into the back wall. They were not normal graffiti. These markings looked old, carved deep into the concrete blocks with something sharp. Geometric shapes, spirals, symbols that looked almost like letters, but in no alphabet I recognized. They covered the entire back wall from floor to ceiling. Jacob walked up to the wall and ran his fingers over the carvings. "These are warm," he said. I remember thinking that was strange because the shed was cold, noticeably colder than the woods outside. But Jacob was right. When I touched the wall, the concrete under those symbols was warm, like something was generating heat from inside the wall itself. I felt wrong standing in that shed. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, and I told everyone we should go. The other kids agreed. We had found the shed, satisfied the dare, and now it was time to get back before our parents noticed we had been gone too long. We started heading toward the door, but Jacob did not follow. He stood in front of that back wall, staring at the symbols, completely still. I called his name. He did not respond. We walked back to him and I grabbed his shoulder. He was ice cold. In the middle of summer, after walking through humid woods, Jacob's skin was cold enough that I jerked my hand back in shock. One of the other kids, a girl named Emma, shook Jacob harder. He blinked and seemed to come back to himself, but something was wrong with his eyes. They looked unfocused, distant. Then Jacob turned and shoved past us with surprising strength, running out of the shed and deeper into the woods. We chased him, shouting his name, but Jacob was faster than he should have been. He ran through the undergrowth like he could see perfectly in the failing light, while we stumbled and tripped trying to keep up. I could hear him ahead of us, crashing through bushes, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Jacob was laughing, but it did not sound like Jacob's laugh. It was deeper, wrong, like an adult was making the sound. We broke into a small clearing, maybe 200 yards past the shed. The clearing was perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, and arranged around the perimeter were stones. Not natural stones. These had been placed deliberately, each one about knee-high and spaced evenly apart. In the center of the circle stood Jacob with his arms raised above his head, still laughing that horrible laugh. The sky directly above the clearing was darker than the surrounding sky, like a shadow had been cast over just that one spot. Even though the sun was still visible through the trees in every other direction. Emma tried to grab Jacob and pull him out of the circle. He spun around to face us, and I will never forget what I saw. Jacob's eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just solid black from corner to corner. He smiled at us, but it was not Jacob's smile. "He is calling me," Jacob said, except the voice was not his. It was deeper, older, and it echoed in a way that made no physical sense in an open clearing. All 6 of us screamed and ran. We ran back through the woods, not caring about trails or direction, just running toward where we thought the pavilion was. I remember thinking we had to get adults, we had to get help. Something was terribly wrong with Jacob. We burst out of the woods near the pavilion, all of us crying and trying to talk at once. The adults initially thought we were playing some kind of game, but Emma's father saw the genuine terror on our faces and took us seriously. A group of 5 adults, including Jacob's father, went into the woods with us to find Jacob. We led them to the clearing with the stone circle. Jacob was gone. We searched for him, calling his name, but there was no response. We found the shed. We found the clearing, but Jacob had vanished. Jacob's father called 911. Within an hour, Greenwood Park was flooded with police, search and rescue teams, and volunteers. They searched through the night with flashlights and dogs. The search continued for 3 days, covering every inch of those woods and the surrounding neighborhoods. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew overhead. Dive teams checked the nearby creek and retention ponds. Hundreds of volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the forest, looking for any sign of Jacob. They found nothing. The search dogs tracked Jacob's scent to the stone circle and lost it there. The dogs would walk to the center of the circle and refuse to go further, whining and backing away like something was preventing them from tracking. The police interviewed all of us extensively. We told them everything. The shed, the symbols, Jacob's black eyes, the voice, the stone circle. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Harris, was sympathetic but clearly skeptical. He suggested we had experienced group hysteria, that fear and darkness had made us imagine things that were not real. He showed us the crime scene photos of the shed. The symbols were real, documented and photographed. But Detective Harris said they were probably just old graffiti, nothing supernatural or unusual. The stone circle was real too. The detective said it was likely left over from some kind of pagan ceremony years ago, not uncommon in public parks. The case was officially classified as a missing endangered juvenile. The working theory was that Jacob had run away or had been abducted by someone in the woods. But as weeks turned to months with no leads, no body, no evidence of foul play, the case went cold. Jacob's face appeared on missing person posters throughout Indianapolis. His parents never stopped looking. His mother still maintains a Facebook page dedicated to finding Jacob, posting updates and pleas for information every week. But 12 years later, there are no answers. I have spent the last 3 years researching Greenwood Park for this podcast. What I discovered has only deepened the mystery. The property where the park now sits has a long history of strange occurrences. In the 1800s, the area was used by indigenous tribes as a ceremonial ground. Historical records from early settlers mention the native population refusing to live on that land, claiming it was a thin place where the boundaries between worlds were weak. In 1956, a man named Thomas Crawford disappeared while hiking in those same woods. His case was never solved. In 1982, a teenage girl named Michelle Sanders vanished during a school picnic at Greenwood Park. Her body was never found. In 1994, a park ranger named David Chen disappeared during his night shift patrol. He was last seen entering the woods to investigate reports of strange lights. David was never seen again. Jacob is the 5th person to vanish from Greenwood Park in recorded history. All of them disappeared in the woods. All of them vanished without a trace. The stone circle has been there for as long as anyone can remember, documented in park surveys going back to the 1930s, though no one knows who built it or why. I interviewed a professor of anthropology at Indiana University who studies indigenous history in the Midwest. She told me the symbols in the shed matched descriptions of summoning rituals used by certain tribes. Rituals meant to call forth entities from other realms. Whether those entities were gods, spirits, or something else entirely depends on interpretation. I have interviewed everyone who was in those woods with Jacob that day. We are all in our mid-20s now, scattered across the country, but we all remember the same details. Jacob's black eyes, the voice that was not his, the way he said he is calling me before he disappeared. The police want closure. They want to believe Jacob ran away and is living somewhere under a new identity. But I was there. I saw what happened. Whatever took Jacob that day was not human, and I do not believe he is living a normal life somewhere. I believe he is still out there, somewhere beyond that stone circle in whatever place calls to people from the woods at Greenwood Park. His family deserves answers. We all do. If anyone has information about Jacob Allen or has experienced similar phenomena at Greenwood Park, please contact me through the podcast website. The police gave up looking, but I never will. In the fall of 2020, emergency services in Anderson, Indiana responded to a call about multiple casualties at a residential property. What they found inside defied explanation and led to one of the most disturbing criminal trials in the state's history. This is the story of the Believers, told through the voices of survivors and investigators. The 3-person household at 1147 Elm Street consisted of Millie Russell, Henry Lawson, and Rosie Sutton, all in their late 20s. They had decided to live together in March of 2020, just as the COVID-19 pandemic shut down most of the country. All 3 had been active members of an online spiritual community called the Awakened Ones, a group that formed during the early days of lockdown when isolated people were searching for connection and meaning. The community focused on consciousness expansion, meditation, and what they called ascension work. Meetings happened through encrypted video calls, and the leader of the group went by the name Oracle. Oracle presented herself as a spiritual guide who had achieved enlightenment and wanted to help others transcend the limitations of physical existence. Her real name was Margaret Price, a 52-year-old woman operating from a compound in rural Montana. though her followers did not learn this until much later. Price had a gift for identifying vulnerable people and speaking directly to their deepest needs. She taught about the illusion of separateness, the power of belief to reshape reality, and the coming great transformation that would divide awakened souls from those trapped in lower consciousness. To Millie, Henry, and Rosie, all of whom were struggling with isolation, job loss, and anxiety during the pandemic, Oracle's teachings felt like salvation. The three decided to form what Oracle called a spiritual pod, living together to accelerate their awakening through constant practice and mutual support. They rented the house on Elm Street and essentially cut themselves off from outside relationships, dedicating themselves completely to the awakened ones. They participated in daily group meditations via video call. They followed Oracle's dietary restrictions, spiritual exercises, and increasingly demanding requirements for proving their commitment. At first, the sacrifices were financial. Oracle taught that money was a trap of the material world, and her followers should donate their resources to support the community's work. Millie, Henry, and Rosie sent thousands of dollars to Oracle over the course of 2020, money they could not afford to lose. But in the summer of 2020, Oracle's teachings took a darker turn. She began speaking about the blood covenant, a concept she claimed had been revealed to her during deep meditation. Oracle taught that true believers must prove their commitment through physical trials, through suffering that would purify their bodies and prepare them for transcendence. She introduced ritual self-harm during the video ceremonies, instructing her followers to make small cuts on their arms or legs as offerings to the higher consciousness. Millie, Henry, and Rosie participated, documenting their cuts on camera, seeking Oracle's approval and praise. The pain, Oracle told them, was temporary and insignificant compared to the eternal bliss that awaited those who proved themselves worthy. The rituals escalated throughout the summer and fall. Oracle introduced the concept of vessel preparation, teaching that physical bodies must be broken down through pain before they could house higher consciousness. The three began engaging in more severe self-harm, cutting deeper, burning themselves, subjecting their bodies to increasing trauma. Neighbors noticed strange behavior. Sounds of crying and chanting came from the house at odd hours. Millie, Henry, and Rosie stopped going outside except for essential errands, and when neighbors saw them, they looked gaunt and exhausted. One neighbor called the police for a welfare check in August, but when officers knocked, Millie answered and insisted everything was fine. The police saw no evidence of immediate danger and left. In early September, Oracle introduced the final teaching. She told her followers that one person in each spiritual pod must make the ultimate sacrifice to anchor the others during the coming ascension. That person would give up their physical body, dying in a ritual that would create an energetic bridge for the others to cross into higher dimensions. Oracle promised that the sacrifice was temporary, that the person who died would be reborn as pure consciousness and would actually experience the transformation first. She presented death not as an ending, but as the greatest honor, proof of absolute faith and devotion. Millie, Henry, and Rosie spent 2 weeks drawing lots to determine who would be the sacrifice. They prayed, meditated, and consulted Oracle through video calls. Millie drew the short straw. She accepted this with what witnesses later described as eerie calm. She spent the following weeks preparing, writing goodbye letters to her estranged family, giving away her possessions, making peace with what she believed was a temporary death that would lead to eternal enlightenment. Oracle guided them through detailed preparations for the sacrifice ritual, providing specific instructions about timing, location, and method. The date was set for September 15, 2020, during the full moon. The night of the ritual, the three gathered in the basement they had spent days preparing. They had painted symbols on the walls and floor using their own blood, symbols Oracle had provided claiming they were ancient and powerful. Candles surrounded a makeshift altar constructed from wooden pallets and white sheets. Millie ingested sedatives Oracle had instructed them to obtain, then lay down on the altar wearing white clothing. Henry and Rosie stood on either side of her, holding the knife and rope Oracle had told them to use. The plan was for Henry to perform the killing while Rosie restrained Millie and chanted the prayers Oracle had taught them. But as Henry approached Millie with the knife, Rosie experienced what she later described as a moment of absolute clarity. She looked at Millie lying drugged on the altar, at Henry holding the knife with tears streaming down his face, at the blood symbols on the walls, and suddenly understood with horrifying certainty that this was murder, not transcendence, not spiritual awakening. Murder. Oracle had spent months manipulating them, gradually normalizing violence and self-destruction until they were willing to kill their friend in the name of enlightenment. Rosie tackled Henry, knocking the knife from his hand. Henry fought back, screaming that Rosie was betraying Oracle, that she was going to ruin everything, that Millie needed this sacrifice to ascend. They struggled on the basement floor while Millie, semi-conscious and confused, tried to understand what was happening. Rosie managed to grab her phone and dial 911. She screamed into the phone that someone was trying to commit murder at 1147 Elm Street, that they needed police immediately. Henry tried to grab the phone, but Rosie held on, still shouting their address to the dispatcher. Police arrived within 7 minutes. They entered the house and found the scene in the basement. Rosie had managed to restrain Henry using the rope that was supposed to be used on Millie. Millie was conscious but incoherent from the sedatives. The walls were covered in blood symbols. The altar stood in the center with the knife lying nearby. Detailed written instructions for performing a ritual sacrifice were found on a table, along with transcripts of video calls with Oracle outlining exactly how the killing should be performed. All three were taken to the hospital and placed under psychiatric evaluation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved when investigators discovered the Awakened Ones was a nationwide operation with members in at least 12 states. As they unraveled Oracle's network, they found evidence of 3 other successful sacrifice rituals that had occurred in different states over the previous 18 months. 6 people had died in these rituals, deaths that had been ruled suicides or accidents because investigators had not understood the connection. Oracle had been running this operation since 2012, targeting vulnerable people through various online spiritual communities, gradually indoctrinating them into accepting violence and self-sacrifice as paths to enlightenment. Margaret Price was arrested at her Montana compound in October of 2020. Her trial revealed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques designed to exploit isolation, fear, and spiritual seeking. Price had studied cult methodology and used every tool available to break down her followers' critical thinking and make them dependent on her guidance. She showed no remorse during the trial. When asked if she felt any responsibility for the 6 deaths, Price calmly stated that she had helped those souls transcend their physical limitations, that their families should be grateful for the gift she had given them. Price was convicted on 6 counts of manslaughter and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to 60 years in federal prison. Millie and Rosie accepted plea deals admitting to conspiracy and receiving probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Both women have spoken publicly about their experience, warning others about the dangers of online manipulation and cult recruitment. Henry refused to denounce Oracle. He insisted throughout his trial that Rosie had ruined a sacred ritual, that Millie had been willing to make the sacrifice, that Oracle's teachings were real and true. Henry was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 12 years in state prison. Even now, according to his attorney, Henry believes Oracle was right and that he failed a test of faith. Rosie Sutton has become an advocate for cult awareness and intervention. She gives interviews, speaks at universities, and works with organizations that help people escape high-control groups. In one interview, she said, "The scariest part was not the moment with the knife. It was the months of gradual indoctrination that made murder seem logical, even righteous. We were not stupid people. We were lonely, scared, looking for meaning during a pandemic when the whole world felt like it was ending." And Margaret Price weaponized that vulnerability. "I came within seconds of helping kill my best friend because I genuinely believed it would save her soul." That is how powerful manipulation can be when it is systematic and targets people in crisis. The Believer's case changed how law enforcement approaches online spiritual communities and led to legislation in several states about digital cult operations and the responsibility of platform providers to monitor for dangerous content. But somewhere, former members of the Awakened Ones still believe Oracle was right. They believe the 6 who died achieved ascension. They believe Margaret Price is a martyr imprisoned for teaching forbidden truths. And they are still waiting in their own homes and secret groups for their chance to prove their faith through sacrifice. The investigation continues, but authorities believe there may be dozens more victims connected to Oracle's operation over the years. People who died alone believing they were ascending to higher consciousness when in reality they were simply dying at the instruction of a predator who understood exactly how to make vulnerable people destroy themselves.